Okay, we are ready for chapter 10 of Voyage of the Dawn Treader. In this chapter, Lucy is going to see a really special, kind of fancy-ish book. So I just want to show you a few things beforehand that will help you imagine what that looks like. This is one page from a huge, giant old book, probably from 400 or 500 years ago. They had really big books like this in churches so that one person could hold it up and people could see, because everybody didn't have a book. So you can see on there what it looks like. And let's see, down in this corner right here, you can even see the texture, because this was on parchment on animal skin, and they had to like scrape the hair off and things from it on each side because they printed on both sides. So this is super cool. Now let me show you the inside of, this is not the book itself. This is a copy of the book. And I was going to look and try and remember exactly when this is from. It's probably from the 15th century. These things were called illuminated manuscripts. Manuscripts meant they were handwritten books, and illuminated meant that they were illustrated. That was kind of their word for illustration. So I'm going to show you a couple. So the pages were very colorful like this. This is in Latin, so you won't be able to understand it. But then around the edge, that's called marginalia, because it's stuff that's drawn in the margins. Look at how fancy that is. And look what's in the corner down here. You see that blue dragon? He's awesome. That's kind of what one page looks like. I think I did this one because it has a dragon and a lion in the bottom, in the marginalia. Okay. And let's see. There was another one. Oh, here's one. This is kind of funny. It's got people who are baking bread in it. Do you see them? Or you could pretend it's a pizza oven, I suppose, too. But this is what illustrated manuscripts look like. At one time, these were the only kind of books there were. And very few people had them because they all had to be made by hand. Can you imagine how much time that took? People to write the letters. They were the scribes. And then you had illuminators who did all the artwork. Well, there's going to be a book like that in this chapter. And now you will know, when it mentions it, you'll have kind of an idea of what it might have looked like, okay? Chapter 10, The Magician's Book. The invisible people feasted their guests royally. It was very funny to see the plates and dishes coming to the table, but not to see anyone carrying them. It would have been funny even if they had moved along level with the floor, as you would expect things to do in invisible hands. But they didn't. They progressed up the long dining hall in a series of bounds or jumps. At the highest point of each jump, a dish would be about 15 feet in the air. That's taller than the roof, the ceiling inside your house. When the dish then it would come down and stop quite suddenly about 3 feet from the floor. When the dish contained anything like soup or stew, the result was rather disastrous. I bet it was. It probably sloshed all over. I'm beginning to feel rather inquisitive about these people, whispered Eustace to Edmund. Do you think they're human at all? Maybe they're more like huge grasshoppers or giant frogs, I should say. It does look like it, said Edmund, but don't put the ideas of grasshoppers into Lucy's head. She's not too keen on insects, especially the big ones. Oh, there's a grasshopper on my shelf right behind me. See it right there? Oops, this side. I keep forgetting that everything is backwards in this. The meal would have been pleasanter if it had not been so exceedingly messy. And also if the conversation had not consisted entirely of agreements. The invisible people agreed about everything. Indeed, most of their remarks were the sort that it would not be easy to disagree with. Things like, what I always say is when a chap's hungry, he likes some victuals. He likes some food. Or, getting dark now, always does at night. Or even, you've come over the water. Powerful wet stuff, ain't it? And Lucy could not help looking at the dark, yawning entrance to the foot of the staircase. She could see it from where she sat, and wondering what she would find when she went up those stairs next morning. But it was a good meal otherwise, with mushroom soup and boiled chickens and hot-boiled ham and gooseberries, red currants, curds, cream, milk, and mead. The others liked the mead, but Eustace was sorry afterwards that he had drunk any. Must have made him not feel good. When Lucy woke up the next morning, they don't tell us where they slept. I wonder if they slept in that big house. Well, when she woke up the next morning, it was like waking up on the day of an examination, a test, or a day when you're going to the dentist. Ugh. It was a lovely morning with bees buzzing in and out of her open window, and the lawn outside looking very like somewhere in England. She got up and she got dressed and she tried to talk and eat ordinarily at breakfast. Then, after being instructed by the chief voice about what she was to do upstairs, she bid goodbye to the others, said nothing, walked to the bottom of the stairs, and began going up them without once looking back. It was quite light, and that was one good thing. There was indeed a window straight ahead of her at the top of the first flight. As long as she was on that flight, she could hear the tick-tock of a grandfather clock in the hall below. Then she came to the landing and she had to turn to her left to go up the next flight of stairs. After that, she couldn't hear the clock anymore. Now she had come to the top of the stairs. Lucy looked and saw a long, wide passage or hallway with a large window at the far end. Apparently, the passage ran the whole length of the house. It was carved and paneled and carpeted with very many doors opened off of it on each side. She stood still and couldn't hear the squeak of a mouse or the buzzing of a fly or the swaying of a curtain or anything except for her own heart. The last doorway on the left, she said to herself. It did seem a bit hard that it should be the last door. To reach it, she would have to walk past room after room, and in any room there might be the magician, asleep or awake or invisible or even dead. But it wouldn't do to think about that. She set out on her journey. The carpet was so thick that her feet made no noise. There's nothing whatever to be afraid of yet, Lucy told herself. And certainly it was a quiet, sunlit passage, perhaps a little bit too quiet. It would have been nicer if there had not been strange signs painted in scarlet on the doors. Twisty, complicated things, which obviously had a meaning, and it might not be a very nice meaning either. It would have been nicer still if there weren't those masks hanging on the wall. Not that they were exactly ugly, or at least not so very ugly, but the empty eye holes did look scary, and if you let yourself, you would soon start imagining that the masks were doing things as soon as your back was turned on them. After about the 6th door, she got her first real fright. For 1 second, she almost felt certain that a wicked little bearded man had popped out of the wall and made a grimace at her. She forced herself to stop and look at it, and it was not a face at all. It was a little mirror, just the size and shape of her own face, with hair on the top of it and a beard hanging down from it, so that when you looked in the mirror, your own face fitted into the hair and beard, and it looked as if they belonged to you. This is a picture of that happening. I just caught my own reflection with the tail of my eye as I went past, said Lucy to herself. That was all it was. It's quite harmless. But she didn't like the look of her own face with that hair and beard. And she went on. I don't know what the bearded glass was for because I'm not a magician. That's what the person who wrote the book is telling us. Before she reached the last door on the left, Lucy was beginning to wonder whether the corridor had grown longer since she began her journey, and whether this was part of the magic of the house. But she at last got to it, and the door was open. It was a large room with 3 big windows, and it was lined from floor to ceiling with books. More books than Lucy had ever seen before. Tiny little books, fat and dumpy books, and books bigger than any church Bible you have ever seen, all bound in leather and smelling old and learned and magical. But she knew from her instructions that she need not bother about any of these, for the book, the magic book, was lying on a reading desk in the very middle of the room. She saw she would have to read it standing. And anyway, there were no chairs, and also that she would have to stand with her back to the door while she read it. So at once she turned to shut the door, but it wouldn't shut. Do you remember that in the wardrobe, Lucy always was careful to leave the door open? But now she wants to shut the door. Now, some people may disagree with Lucy about this, but I think she was quite right. She said she wouldn't have minded if she could have shut the door, but that it was unpleasant to have to stand in a place like that with an open doorway right behind your back when she couldn't see. I think I should have felt just the same, but there was nothing else to be done. One thing that worried her a good deal was the size of the book. The chief voice had not been able to give her any idea whereabouts in the book the spell for making things visible was. He expected her to begin at the beginning and then to go on until she came to it. It obviously wouldn't have occurred to him that there was any other way of finding a place in a book. But it might take me days. It might take me weeks, said Lucy, looking at the huge volume, and I feel already as if I'd been in this place for hours. She went up to the desk and laid her hand on the book. Her fingers tingled when she touched it as if it were full of electricity. She tried to open it, but she couldn't at first. This, however, was only because it was fastened by 2 lead clasps. And when she had undone these, it opened easily enough. And what a book it was. It was written, not printed, like the ones I showed you. It was written in a clear, even hand, with thick downstrokes and thin upstrokes. Very large, easier than print, and so beautiful that Lucy stared at it for a whole minute and forgot about reading it. The paper was crisp and smooth, and a nice smell came from it. And in the margins, remember that? And around the big colored capital letters at the beginning of each spell, there were pictures. There was no title page or title. The spells began straight away, and at first there was nothing very important in them. There were cures for warts by washing your hands in moonlight in a silver basin, and toothache and cramp, and a spell for taking a swarm of bees. Let's look at what the book looked like, okay? Okay. So that first word is cure for warts. And then W-A, and then it looks like an F, but that's something that's called a long S. And when they hand wrote books, and even when they first started printing books, that's something that they used often. So that next word is wash, even though it looks like waf. In A, the next word starts with a long S. So that's a letter S in a silver basin. Do you see what the S's look like now? So cure for warts. Wash in a silver basin by moonlight. And look at the cute bees drawn around the edge there. Oh, and this one, do you see the dragon? So in all the marginalia, I see some birds and I see some vines and I see a dragon at the very top, a green dragon. Okay, so all this stuff is in these books, in this book. The picture of the man with the toothache was so lifelike that it would have set your own teeth aching if you looked at it for too long. And the golden bees, which were dotted all around the 4th spell, looked for a moment as if they were really flying. Lucy could hardly tear herself away from that first page, but when she turned it over, the next was just as interesting. But I must get on, she told herself, and on she went for about 30 pages, which, if she could have remembered them, would have taught her how to find buried treasure, how to remember things forgotten, how to forget things you wanted to forget, how to tell whether anyone was speaking the truth, how to call up or prevent wind, fog, snow, sleet, or rain, how to produce enchanted sleeps, and how to give a man a donkey's head, just like they did to poor Bottom. And the longer she read, the more wonderful and the more real the pictures became. Then she came to a page, which was such a blaze of pictures that one hardly noticed the handwriting. Hardly. But she did notice the first words. This is what they were. And infallible spell to make beautiful her that uttereth wit beyond the lot of mortals. Lucy peered at the pictures. Did that make sense to you? It's a spell that would make someone more beautiful than anybody else. Lucy peered at the pictures with her face close to the page. And though they had seemed crowded and muddlesome before, she found that she could now see them quite clearly. The first was a picture of a girl standing at a reading desk reading in a huge book. And the girl was dressed exactly like Lucy. In the next picture, Lucy, for the girl in the picture was Lucy herself, was standing up with her mouth open and a rather terrible expression on her face, chanting or reciting something. In the third picture, the beauty beyond the lot of mortals had come to her. It was strange, considering how small the pictures had looked at first, that Lucy in that picture now seemed quite as big as the real Lucy. And they looked into each other's eyes, and the real Lucy looked away after a few minutes because she was dazzled by the beauty of the other Lucy, though she could still see a sort of likeness to herself in that beautiful face. And now the pictures came crowding on her thick and fast. She saw herself throned on high at a great tournament in Calormen, and all the kings of the world fought because of her beauty. After that, it turned from tournaments to real wars, and all Narnia and Archenland, Telmar and Calormen, Galma and Terabithia were laid waste with the fury of the kings and dukes and great lords who fought for her favor. Then it changed, and Lucy, still beautiful beyond the lot of mortals, was back in England. And Susan, who had always been the beauty of the family, came home from America. The Susan in the picture looked exactly like the real Susan, only plainer and with a nasty expression. And Susan was jealous of the dazzling beauty of Lucy. But that didn't matter a bit now, because no one cared anything about Susan at all. "I will say the spell," said Lucy. "I don't care. I will." She said, "I don't care," because she had a strong feeling that she mustn't do it. But when she looked back at the opening words of the spell, there in the middle of the writing, where she felt quite sure they had been no picture before, she found the great face of a lion, of the lion, of Aslan himself, staring into hers. It was painted such a bright gold that it seemed to be coming towards her right out of the page. And indeed, she never was quite sure afterwards that it hadn't really moved a little bit. At any rate, she knew that expression on his face quite well. He was growling, and you could see most of his teeth. She became horribly afraid, and she turned over the page at once. A little later, she came to a spell which would let you know what your friends thought about you. Now, Lucy had wanted very badly to try the other spell, the one that made you beautiful beyond the lot of mortals. So she felt that to make up for not having said it, she really would say this one. And all in a hurry, for fear that her mind would change, she said the words, "Nothing will induce me to tell you what they were. I won't." Then she waited for something to happen. As nothing happened, she began looking at the pictures. And all at once, she saw the very last thing she expected. A picture of a third-class carriage in a train, with two girls sitting in it. She knew them at once. They were Marjorie Preston and Anne Featherstone. Only now it was much more than a picture. It was alive. She could see the telegraph posts flicking past outside the window while the train ran. Then gradually, like when the radio was first coming on, she could hear what they were saying. "Shall I see you anything of you this term?" said Anne. "Or are you still going to be all taken up with Lucy Pevensey?" "I don't know what you mean by taken up," said Marjorie. "Oh, yes, you do," said Anne. "You were crazy about her last term." "No, I wasn't," said Marjorie. "I've got more sense than that. She's not a bad little kid in her own way, but I was getting pretty tired of her before the end of the term." "Well, you jolly well won't have the chance any other term," shouted Lucy. "You two-faced little beast." But the sound of her own voice at once reminded her that she was talking to a picture and that the real Marjorie was far away in another world. "Well," said Lucy to herself, "I did think better of her than that. And I did all sorts of things for her last term, and I stuck to her when not many other girls would, and she knows it too. And to Anne Featherstone, of all people. I wonder, are all my friends the same? There are lots of other pictures. No, I won't look at any more. I won't. I won't. And with a great effort, she turned over the page, but not before a large, angry tear had splashed onto it. On the next page, she came to a spell for the refreshment of the spirit. The pictures were fewer here, but very beautiful. And what Lucy found herself reading was more like a story than a spell. It went on for 3 pages, and before she had read to the bottom of the page, she'd forgotten that she was reading at all. She was living in the story as if it were real, and all the pictures were real too. That's the kind of book that I like. When she had got to the 3rd page and come to the end, she said, "Oh, that is the loveliest story I've ever read or ever shall read in my whole life. Oh, I wish I could have gone on reading it for 10 years. At least, well, I'll read it over again." But here, part of the magic of the book came into play. You couldn't turn back. The right-hand pages, the ones ahead, could be turned, but the left-hand ones could not be turned. "Oh, what a shame," said Lucy. "I did so want to read it again. Well, at least I can remember it. Let's see. It was about, oh dear, it's all fading away again. And even this last page is going blank. This is a very strange book. How can I have already forgotten? It was about a cup and a sword and a tree and a green hill. I know that much, but I can't remember. And now what shall I do?" And she never could remember. And ever since that day, what Lucy means by a good story is a story which reminds her of the forgotten story in the magician's book. She turned on and then found to her surprise a page with no pictures at all. But the first words were, "A spell to make hidden things visible." She read it through to make sure of all the hard words, and then she said it out loud. And she knew at once that it was working because as she spoke, the colors came into the capital letters at the top of the page. And pictures began appearing in the margins, just like the rest of the book. It was like when you hold to the fire something written in invisible ink, and the writing gradually shows up. Only, instead of the dingy color of lemon juice, which is the easiest invisible ink of all, this was all gold and blue and scarlet. There were odd pictures, and they contained many figures that Lucy did not much like the look of. And then she thought, well, I suppose I've made everything visible, not only the thumpers. That's what she called the people. There might be lots of other invisible things hanging about a place like this, and I'm not sure that I want to see them all. At that moment, she heard soft, heavy footfalls coming along the corridor behind her. And of course, she remembered what she'd been told about the magician walking in his bare feet and making no more noise than a cat. It is always better to turn round than to have anything creeping up behind your back. So Lucy did. And then her face lit up until, for a moment, but of course she didn't know it, she looked almost as beautiful as that other Lucy in the picture. And she ran forward with a little cry of delight and with her arms stretched out. For what stood in the doorway was not the magician, but it was Aslan himself, the lion, the highest of all high kings. And he was solid and real and warm, and he let her kiss and bury herself in his shining mane. And from the low, earthquake-like sound that came from inside him, Lucy even dared to think that he was purring, like the cats that we have in our houses. "Oh, Aslan," said she, "it was kind of you to come." "I've been here all the time," said he, "but you have just made me visible." "Aslan," said Lucy, almost a little reproachfully, "don't make fun of me, as if anything I could do would make you visible." "It did, though," said Aslan. "Do you think I wouldn't obey my own rules?" After a little pause, he spoke again. "Child," he said, "I think you have been eavesdropping." "Eavesdropping?" "You listened to what your 2 schoolfellows were saying about you." "Oh, that? I never thought that was eavesdropping, Aslan. Wasn't it just magic?" "Spying on people by magic is the same as spying on them in any other way. And you have misjudged your friend. She is weak, but she loves you. She was afraid of that older girl and said what she does not mean. I don't think I'd ever be able to forget what I heard her say, said Lucy. No, you won't, said Aslan. Oh dear, said Lucy. Have I spoiled everything? Do you mean we would have gone on being friends if it hadn't been for this? And been really great friends all our lives, perhaps? And now we never shall? Child, said Aslan, did I not explain to you once before that no one is ever told what would have happened? Yes, Aslan, you did, said Lucy. I'm sorry. But please, speak on, dear heart. Shall I ever be able to read that story again, the one I couldn't remember? Will you tell it to me, Aslan? Oh, do. Indeed, yes. I will tell it to you for years and years. But now come. We must meet the master of this house. That makes me want to know what that story was about. Doesn't it make you think that too? If he said he's going to tell it to her for years and years, I think there's something special going on there. That is the end of chapter 10 of Voyage of the Dawn Treader.